At 34,000 feet, Flight 712 thundered above the clouds, slicing through London's late afternoon haze. Passengers chatted quietly, some dozing, others scrolling through phones, oblivious to the storm of events about to unfold. Maya Carter, 17, sat near the wing, gripping the armrest, staring through the oval window at the patchwork of lights below. She had flown many times alone, always calm, always observing, but today felt different. The air smelled faintly of jet fuel, though she dismissed it. The dull roar of the engines was normal, or so she thought. Then the right engine groaned, a metallic screech cutting through the cabin's hum. Maya's head jerked up, eyes widening. Passengers glanced nervously around, some laughing nervously, thinking it was routine. But the trembling continued, growing louder, vibrating through the seats. Sparks flickered along the wing, visible even from inside. Panic started to bubble. A mother clutched her child, whispering soothing lies. The flight attendants, practiced calm, looked strained, masks of professionalism cracking. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated," the captain's voice crackled over the intercom, unusually low and hesitant. We've got a mechanical issue. Remain calm, we are assessing." Maya's stomach dropped. She knew immediately this was no routine alarm. She'd grown up around airfields, her father a retired test pilot, her uncle a commercial flight instructor, and she had memorized emergency protocols as bedtime stories. She'd logged hundreds of hours on simulators she wasn't even allowed to use at her age, just for practice, just for fun. But this was real, real enough to kill, real enough that no simulator could prepare her for it. A flash of orange lit the cabin. Flames were licking the right engine cowling. The smell of smoke became pungent, acrid, choking. Oxygen masks dropped, swinging like strange pendulums from the ceiling. Panic erupted like a dam breaking. Screams tore through the plane as passengers fumbled to secure themselves. Phones clattered to the floor. A man yelled over the chaos, threatening flight attendants. A little girl wailed as her mother tried to shield her. Maya's instincts took over. She scanned the cabin, noting the flight attendants' panicked eyes, the captain's erratic commands, the way the first officer's hands trembled over the controls. Then she heard it, the crackling, urgent code words over the intercom. Distress signals repeated in patterns she had drilled in simulators. Her heart raced, but her mind sharpened. She didn't think about being 17. She didn't think about the odds stacked against her. She thought only of the hundreds of lives depending on someone to act. The captain's voice broke over the intercom again, almost a whisper. "Is anyone qualified to assist? Please, anyone." Time slowed. Maya's pulse hammered in her ears. She felt the vibration of the plane beneath her, the fluttering of fear in every passenger, the rising pitch of alarms. She stood, trembling, and called out, her voice barely cutting through the chaos. "I can help, I've trained for this." Eyes turned to her. Gasps rippled through the cabin. Flight attendants froze, unsure whether to dismiss or embrace her offer. The first officer hesitated, eyes wide with disbelief, mouth open. The captain's voice came again, this time weaker, strained by smoke inhalation. "Please, any help we're losing control." Maya ran down the aisle, ducking over fallen belongings, sidestepping terrified passengers, ignoring the heat emanating from the wing. Sweat stung her eyes as the cabin lights flickered. Every step was measured, every breath counted. She reached the cockpit door, which had jammed from vibrations. Her hands shook, but she forced it open, swinging the door wide. Smoke poured in, stinging lungs, but she pushed forward. Inside, the cockpit was chaos. Smoke curled through the vents, instruments flashed warnings, and the captain slumped over the yoke, coughing violently. The first officer fought to regain control, eyes wide, hands moving in frantic patterns. Flames from the engine reflected in the cracked glass of the cockpit, orange and menacing. The oxygen masks hung uselessly, dripping condensation onto the panels. "Who are you?" the first officer demanded, staring at her like she had grown wings. I've trained," Maya said, fighting to keep her voice steady. "Flight simulators, emergency procedures, I know the plane." The captain coughed violently. "A child this is," he couldn't finish. A loud bang shook the fuselage, followed by another alarm. The hydraulic system was failing. The right wing dipped slightly and passengers screamed again, feeling the plane lurch. Maya's mind raced. She scanned the panels quickly, recalling every cockpit diagram she had memorized. The emergency checklist drilled into her memory clicked like a metronome. She knew exactly which levers to pull, which controls to stabilize, which systems could be overridden. There was no time for hesitation. "Listen to me," she said, stepping closer to the yoke. "We can stabilize this. I can help. Tell me what to do." The first officer blinked, unsure if he was hallucinating. Then, with no better option, he stepped aside, allowing her a clear view of the controls. The captain coughed again, reaching feebly for her shoulder. "You may be our only chance," he rasped. Outside, London's sprawling lights twinkled through a haze of smoke and cloud, oblivious to the drama above. Maya's stomach twisted, a mixture of fear and determination. Every second counted. One wrong move, and the plane, along with everyone inside, could plummet into the city below. She slid into the jump seat, fingers hovering over levers, buttons, and the yoke. The aircraft trembled again, warning alarms screaming in unison, as if the plane itself sensed the urgency. Maya closed her eyes for a moment, recalling her father's voice. "Trust your instincts. Trust what you know. Don't panic. Panic kills." When she opened them, the plane's interior seemed to slow, the screaming passengers muffled, the world narrowing to a single point. The cockpit, the controls, the fire, and the lives depending on her. A sudden lurch sent her sliding against the panel, smoke stinging her eyes. Flames flared along the wingtip outside, visible through the cockpit glass. The plane was tilting dangerously. Maya grabbed the yoke, muscles tense, heart racing, mind calculating every possible outcome. And then, as if time itself held its breath, the captain's voice cut through the smoke. "You're our only hope." Maya nodded, not because she was confident, but because there was no other choice. The plane shuddered again, alarm bells piercing her ears. London's lights swirled below through a haze of smoke and flames. She had never felt fear like this, not in any simulator, not in any drill. And yet, amidst the chaos, she found a strange clarity. Every calculation, every reflex, every instinct would now be tested in real life. She gritted her teeth, braced herself, and whispered to no one but herself, "Let's bring them home." And with that, Maya Carter, 17, alone and untested in the world of live emergencies, gripped the yoke of a burning plane over London, staring down what could be the final moments of 275 lives. The cockpit alarms screamed louder, flames danced along the fuselage, the engine groaned in protest, and above all, a terrifying thought surged into her mind. Maya's fingers hovered over the controls, sweat slicking her palms. The cockpit smelled of smoke and hot metal. Flames licked the right engine, orange and angry, reflecting across the instrument panels. The plane shuddered violently, tilting toward the ground. London's skyline stretched below, twisted and blurred through the haze. Somewhere in the cabin, passengers screamed, prayed, and clutched at each other as if sheer will could halt the descent. The first officer, eyes wide with disbelief, finally spoke, his voice trembling. 17 years old, and you've flown simulators." Maya's voice was steady, unnervingly calm. "Hundreds of hours. I know this plane. I can help. Tell me what's happening with the hydraulics and the flaps." The captain coughed violently, smoke streaking his face, his hands shaking as he tried to remain upright. "Hydraulic pressure critically low. Right engine compromised. If the left engine fails, it's over." Maya took a deep breath. Fear was a luxury she couldn't afford. She scanned the warning panels, identifying the failures. Flaps locked, right engine overheating, fuel valves showing irregular pressure, rudder sensitivity compromised. Each system had its own personality, its own quirks, learned only through hours of experience. You'll need to trim manually, she instructed, moving swiftly, fingers darting over switches with precision. Stabilize the plane first. Feather the right engine if possible. Override the autopilot. I'll coordinate with ATC. The first officer hesitated. Okay if you're sure. I'm sure, she said, a taut note of authority in her voice. She knew doubt could be deadly. Minutes stretched like hours. Outside, clouds swirled and the afternoon light dimmed, turning London below into a murky, chaotic mosaic. The plane groaned under the strain, wings flexing dangerously. Maya adjusted the yoke, nudging the nose upward to counteract the tilt, balancing altitude with precision honed in countless simulated emergencies. Her heart raced, but her mind remained cold and calculating. She ignored the alarms, the smoke curling around her, the smell of burning metal. She focused only on what she could control: the yoke, the engine, the instruments. Mayday, Mayday, Flight 712, engine fire, descending emergency, crackled the radio. Air traffic control's voices flooded in, instructions, questions, warnings, but Maya filtered it all. Only the runway mattered. Only the landing mattered. Keep your speed steady, she told the first officer, who obeyed like a soldier following orders under fire. We need at least 30,000 feet to stabilize, then a slow descent. Use rudder carefully. The hydraulics are unreliable. The plane lurched again, smoke blinding the cockpit windows momentarily. Maya blinked rapidly, refusing to panic. She could feel the vibrations of metal straining under stress. She calculated angles, velocities, descent rates, all in her head, all in seconds. The first officer swallowed hard. You're doing it. You're actually controlling it. Maya didn't answer. Words were useless here. Precision mattered. She adjusted the yoke, leaned forward, and flicked a switch. The engine shuddered, groaned, and finally stabilized just enough to contribute power. Below, the Thames glimmered like a silver warning. She visualized the plane touching the runway, the exact angle, the speed, the trajectory. One miscalculation and the jet would explode or skid off the tarmac. Hundreds of lives depended on a perfect landing. The captain coughed again, weak but conscious. You may save us all, young lady, he whispered, voice barely audible over alarms. Maya didn't respond. There was no time for pride, only survival. Flaps are responding partially, she said, eyes scanning the panel. We can work with this, but we'll need to adjust trim constantly. Keep steady on heading. The plane shuddered again, a violent roll rocking them toward the left. Panic clawed at her, but she ignored it. Muscle memory guided her. Hands and feet worked in synchronized precision, adjusting throttle, tilting the yoke, manipulating rudder pedals. She felt the plane begin to stabilize, just slightly, enough to make the next critical move, aligning with Heathrow. Air traffic control's voice cracked through, alarmed. Flight 712, your descent is erratic. You must hold instructions, Maya barked. We're managing, I've got it. The first officer stared at her, mouth agape. This was no longer a teenager pretending to know what she was doing. This was someone controlling a steel beast in flames, a living, breathing hero in the midst of chaos. Brace for turbulence over London, ATC warned, but Maya already calculated wind shear, crosswinds, and downdrafts. She adjusted the plane's pitch, banking carefully, feeling the weight shift under her hands. The right engine coughed, flames licking higher, but she kept her grip steady. She had minutes, maybe seconds, to align with the runway. Passenger cabin secured, she asked, not glancing back. Mostly, the first officer muttered. People are panicking, but everyone's in seats. Good, keep it that way, she said. Panic was contagious. She couldn't allow fear to spread, not now. The plane dipped, altitude bleeding rapidly. London streets stretched below, impossibly small, glowing like veins of light in a dark world. She calculated again. Glide slope, approach angle, wind factor. She adjusted throttle in tiny increments, each move critical, each misstep fatal. Suddenly, a violent shudder rocked the plane. Smoke filled the cockpit more densely, sensors overloaded. Maya's heart skipped a beat. This was beyond anything she had trained for. The engine flared, sparks shooting along the wing. She swallowed her fear, focusing only on action. "Rudder 5 degrees left, trim right," she muttered under her breath, muscles straining. The first officer mirrored her, adjusting as instructed. Together they fought the plane's inertia, battling the fire and failing hydraulics. Another warning light flashed, fuel imbalance detected. Panic tried to claw its way back into her chest, but Maya's mind snapped it down like a vice. She worked fast, switching fuel valves, redistributing weight, ensuring the plane didn't tip into a fatal roll. "Passenger cabin, they're scared," the first officer shouted over the roar. "Let them be scared," Maya said firmly. "We only have one chance. Focus on what we can control. Everyone lives if we make it to the runway." The plane leveled just enough. Smoke streamed past the cockpit window in blinding streaks. Flames roared outside. Yet beneath all the alarms, the calculations in Maya's mind clicked into place. The glide path was nearly aligned. Heathrow was coming into view. She could see the lights of the tarmac glinting through the haze like a lifeline. She leaned forward, eyes narrowing. The next move would determine everything. One wrong adjustment, one miscalculation, one hesitation, and hundreds of lives would end. But she had rehearsed this in every simulator, every scenario, every imaginary emergency in her mind since childhood. "Ready," she whispered. Not to anyone, not to the officers, not to herself, just the plane. Then the right engine coughed one last time, smoke flaring dramatically across the wingtip. A sudden lurch sent her sliding slightly forward. The alarm screamed louder than ever. And for a moment, the cockpit, the plane, the passengers, and Maya all hung suspended between life and death. Would she be able to land this burning, dying aircraft safely? The answer lay in the next seconds, and nobody, not even Maya herself, knew what would happen. The runway lights glimmered faintly through the smoky haze below, like fragile lifelines on the darkened canvas of London. Maya's pulse pounded in time with the alarms ringing through the cockpit. Every warning, every flare, every vibration from the faltering engines carried a single, terrifying message. One mistake now, and Flight 712 would crash. The plane shuddered again, violently, as the right engine coughed, sparks flashing across the wingtip like firecrackers. She swallowed hard, her knuckles white on the yoke. The glide slope was imperfect, the altitude bleeding faster than she wanted, the descent angle dangerously steep. She adjusted the throttle in tiny, precise increments, balancing the failing left engine with the flaming right. She could feel the weight of hundreds of lives pressing down on her, each breath in the cabin heavy with fear. "Flaps aren't responding fully," the first officer muttered, voice strained. "We can't slow enough for a smooth landing." He cut himself off as the plane jerked, violently tilting toward the left. "Partial flaps are better than none," Maya said sharply. "We adjust with trim and rudder. Watch me." She focused, blocking out the panic around her, the screaming passengers, the smell of smoke that had begun to burn in her lungs. Each adjustment was precise, a ballet of mathematics and instinct, honed over hundreds of simulated emergency flights she had practiced secretly since she was 12. Air traffic control crackled again, voices urgent, strained. "Flight 712, wind shear detected on final approach. Runway 27 clear, but advise caution. You must." "Hold instructions," Maya snapped, her voice slicing through the chaos. "We're stabilizing. No advice now, just guidance for distance." The captain coughed violently, barely conscious. You're doing it, I never thought." "Save your strength," Maya replied tersely. She didn't have time for flattery or disbelief. She had to land the plane. Every second wasted talking could be a fatal second. The runway drew nearer. The wet tarmac reflected the plane's orange glow as sparks from the engine streaked the air. Below, emergency crews waited, their lights flashing, ready to respond to catastrophe. They had no idea who this girl was, or that she might be the only thing keeping 275 souls from becoming a statistic. Maya adjusted rudder and trim, glancing only briefly at the instruments, trusting her instincts honed over years of simulated emergencies. She could feel the plane respond under her hands, almost like a living creature, rebelling yet cooperating, a delicate balance between destruction and salvation. Then came a violent shudder, the second engine's output faltering. Smoke poured in thicker waves, nearly blinding her. Sparks flew across the wingtip. The plane dipped dangerously. The first officer grabbed the yoke instinctively. "Let me," he started. "No," Maya's voice cracked with authority, cutting through the noise. "I've got it. Follow my commands. Do not override me." He froze, staring in awe as a teenage girl wrestled the massive jet under impossible circumstances. They lurched again, teetering between life and death, the wings flexing, alarms screaming. Maya's mind raced, calculating speed, angle, fuel levels, and altitude. She had maybe 3 minutes to get it right. 3 minutes to save 275 lives. She glanced toward the cabin through the smoke-streaked glass of the cockpit door. Screams had subsided into tense silence. Passengers clutched their loved ones, bracing for impact, unaware that the fate of the plane rested in the hands of someone barely out of high school. Speed reduced gradually, trim 2 degrees right, rudder 3 left, she instructed, her voice a lifeline for the first officer. "Hold steady, ignore the alarms, follow my rhythm." The plane responded slightly but still wobbled perilously. Maya's heart raced, her stomach twisted. She felt the throttle pulse beneath her hands as she nudged the yoke forward, then back, micro-adjusting every movement. London's streets below blurred, a web of yellow-orange lights. Any miscalculation now could send the plane into buildings, the river, or worse. The right engine flared violently, flames leaping higher, smoke curling into thick black clouds. Alarms screamed in the cockpit, warning of critical hydraulic failure. The plane shook as if protesting, the metal groaning under extreme stress. Maya clenched her jaw, her mind calculating angles, descent, speed, every variable, every risk, every life. "Brace for turbulence," ATC shouted, but Maya had already accounted for it. She gritted her teeth, adjusting trim, pulling slight corrections with the yoke. Slowly, agonizingly, the plane steadied, a fraction enough to continue the descent. Below she could see the runway clearly now, wet and gleaming under emergency lights. Fire crews and rescue teams moved in formation, unaware of the drama in the cockpit. She knew there was no margin for error. She visualized the landing, the glide slope, the approach angle, the touchdown speed. One wrong move, one hesitation, one misjudgment, and 275 lives would end. The first officer swallowed hard, voice trembling. We're lined up. This is incredible. I don't know if I've ever seen." "Focus," Maya snapped. "Do not panic. Everyone survives if we land." The plane shuddered violently, sparks streaking the right wing. Flames licked higher. Smoke filled the cockpit, stinging her eyes. Her heart pounded, but her mind was sharp, every movement precise. She guided the jet like a dancer on a knife's edge, balancing throttle, trim, and rudder. The descent rate slowed. The runway grew larger in the window, a lifeline stretching toward her. And then came the final test, the wind shear. A violent gust hit the plane, throwing it off balance. Instruments flickered, alarms screamed, and the plane tilted dangerously. Maya's stomach dropped as she gritted her teeth, yanking the yoke in a precise arc, nudging the rudder, adjusting trim, praying the physics of her calculations matched reality. Seconds stretched into eternity. The plane's nose aligned. The wheels neared the wet tarmac. Maya whispered a prayer, one she had never spoken aloud before, asking only for control, only for steadiness, only for survival. Then a terrifying thought surged through her. If she misjudged the approach, if the plane landed too fast, the tires could explode, the fuselage could buckle, flames could engulf them all. Her hands shook slightly, but she pressed on, refusing to falter. Below, the emergency crews prepared. Tires screeched, engines roared, alarms screamed. Every fiber of her being focused on one single task, landing Flight 712 without killing a soul. Maya felt the plane touch the runway, the wheels connecting with a jolt that reverberated through the fuselage. Sparks flew, metal groaned, and for a moment it seemed like the plane might skid out of control. But she adjusted, nudged the yoke, applied throttle sparingly to stabilize. The fuselage trembled, then settled slightly. Her stomach twisted as she glanced at the cabin. Passengers clutched at their loved ones, eyes wide, some unaware that they were moments away from death, or that a 17-year-old girl was guiding them through the fire. "Keep steady," she barked to the first officer. The plane skidded along the runway, smoke and sparks trailing the right wing. Wheels screamed against asphalt. Every passenger braced, every heart pounding. Maya held her breath, calculating every inch, every second. The runway stretched endlessly before her, but she refused to panic. She refused to let fear dictate the outcome. Every action, every micro-adjustment, every decision mattered. And then, just as the plane began to align perfectly, another alarm blared. The landing gear hydraulic system was failing. The nose began to dip. Sparks shot skyward. The first officer froze. Maya clenched her teeth. "Hold it, don't let it tip, I've got this." The runway lights grew closer. The plane shuddered. The engine screamed. Smoke curled around the cockpit, hot and suffocating. Her fingers worked the yoke with precision, nudging, correcting, counteracting, holding back disaster by sheer willpower. For a heartbeat, the plane hung between catastrophe and survival, suspended by the skill, courage, and audacity of a 17-year-old girl. The emergency crews below had no idea that a teenager was the only thing keeping 275 lives from being obliterated. They were preparing for impact, unaware that the impossible was already in motion. Maya's heart hammered, every muscle tense, eyes narrowing on the runway. She whispered to herself, "One more inch, one more second, hold, hold, hold." And the plane, trembling under her hands, began to settle, almost obedient to her will. But the danger was far from over. The runway stretched beneath them like a fragile lifeline. Maya's heart pounded in rhythm with the alarms as Flight 712 descended over Heathrow, the emergency lights flickering through thick smoke curling from the right engine. Sparks trailed along the wingtip like fiery streaks, painting the fuselage in orange chaos. Each vibration, each tremor, each groan of metal under stress reminded her of the lives depending on her every decision. 275 souls crammed into seats that could easily become coffins if she faltered. "Speed check," she muttered, fingers flying over the controls. 20 knots above minimum, keep brakes ready, rudder at 3 degrees left, flaps partial, watch drift. The first officer followed her commands with precision, barely breathing, mirroring her actions. His disbelief had transformed into a tense, silent trust. He didn't know how a 17-year-old could command a failing aircraft, but he had no choice. For the first time in decades of flying, he realized that survival depended not on experience but on courage and sheer, audacious instinct. The cabin had gone deathly quiet. Passengers clutched loved ones, praying, some gripping seatbacks so tightly their knuckles had turned white. No one knew who was controlling the plane, only that somehow the jet seemed steadier, despite the flames outside and the smoke infiltrating the cabin. Maya focused on the runway lights, glinting like a path of salvation through the smoke. The plane shuddered violently, testing her balance and control. Sparks erupted from the failing right engine and flames flared higher, licking the fuselage. The alarms blared in a horrifying cacophony, threatening to drown her thoughts, but she blocked them out. "Focus," she reminded herself. "Focus on what you can control." The first officer broke the silence. "Brace for turbulence. Wind shear detected, impact could be rough." Maya's eyes narrowed. She had accounted for wind shear in her calculations, but nothing prepared her for the violent gust that slammed into the fuselage, twisting the plane. The right wing dipped, sparks flying, alarms screaming louder than ever. "Hold it, pull back on the yoke slightly. Rudder 2 degrees right, trim left," she barked, voice steady despite the chaos. Muscle memory guided her. The plane responded, groaning under the strain but stabilizing just enough. She could see the tarmac growing larger in the cockpit window, the runway lines stretching toward her like a narrow bridge between life and death. Passengers gripped each other, silent now, sensing the tension, feeling the vibrations, hearing the creaks of stressed metal. Every movement of the plane translated into a visceral fear they couldn't articulate. They didn't know it yet, but their lives rested in the hands of a teenager whose heart pounded in time with every tremor of the aircraft. The captain, coughing violently, weakly reached toward the controls. "Maya, you're doing it. Do not interfere," she snapped. "Focus on your breathing, trust me. Everyone survives if we land." The plane shuddered again as the runway approached closer. She adjusted throttle, trim, and rudder in precise increments. Sparks flew as the landing gear made contact with the wet tarmac. Tires screeched, sparks erupted, smoke poured from friction. The fuselage trembled. Every passenger held their breath, feeling the plane's violent adjustments beneath them. The runway flashed beneath them, the end still too far away. Maya realized that even a minor miscalculation now could result in a catastrophic overrun. She needed to bleed speed without losing stability, a delicate ballet of throttle and yoke manipulation. Every muscle screamed with tension. Her mind worked faster than ever before, calculating angles, speeds, and forces while filtering the chaos of alarms and flames. "Rudder steady, flaps partial, brakes ready," she muttered, almost to herself. She gently applied the brakes, feeling the wheels grip the wet runway. Sparks shot up as metal kissed asphalt. The plane lurched violently, threatening to tip as the hydraulic system groaned under the strain. The first officer gritted his teeth. She's controlling it. I can't believe it." Maya ignored him, eyes fixed on the runway, vision narrowing to the path ahead. The plane skidded slightly to the left. Sparks flew higher as friction intensified. Flames from the right engine roared dangerously close to the fuselage. Every passenger's life balanced on a knife's edge. She had to guide the plane perfectly to avoid the end of the runway and nearby fuel trucks. "Left rudder now, trim right, hold steady," Maya barked. The plane responded with agonizing slowness, teetering, wobbling, groaning under pressure. She could feel her own fear clawing at her, but she pushed it down. Panic would kill them all. Only focus mattered. Every second stretched, each heartbeat pounding like a drum of survival. The runway rushed up to meet them. The tires screamed. The fuselage shook violently. Sparks erupted from friction against wet asphalt. Maya applied final corrections, adjusting trim, nudging the yoke slightly. The plane straightened, just enough. Below, emergency crews held their positions, unaware of the young girl who had just guided the flaming jet into a precarious alignment. They were ready for disaster, unaware that disaster had already been held at bay. The plane skidded forward. The engines flared, sparks flying from the stressed wing. The nose began to settle. Maya's fingers trembled slightly as she nudged the yoke to absorb the final tremors. The plane's momentum slowed. Every second stretched into eternity. Then a sudden, terrifying lurch. The hydraulic system for the landing gear failed completely. The nose dipped sharply, sparks shooting high. The plane threatened to tip forward. Passengers gasped, gripping seatbacks and loved ones. Maya's heart leapt into her throat. "Hold it, rudder steady, trim, full right," she shouted, muscles straining. Every ounce of strength and skill she possessed funneled into controlling the massive machine. The plane shuddered, the fuselage groaning as the nose lifted slightly, teetering on the edge between disaster and salvation. Seconds felt like minutes. Sparks flew, flames roared, alarms screamed, yet the plane began to respond. The nose stabilized. The fuselage straightened. The runway stretched beneath them, glistening with reflections of emergency lights. Maya could hear her own heartbeat, loud and furious. Her hands shook on the yoke, sweat stinging her eyes. She whispered to herself, a quiet mantra barely audible. "One more second, hold, hold, hold." And then, ever so gradually, the plane slowed. The friction, the sparks, the flames, the groaning metal, all began to relent as the massive jet finally found a tenuous equilibrium. The fuselage trembled, tires smoked, but the plane held steady. The first officer exhaled a long, trembling breath. We made it, she's holding it." Maya didn't respond immediately. She focused on keeping the plane straight, absorbing every vibration, every tremor, every alarm. The runway was not over yet. One wrong move could send them sliding off, into the fire cruise, into destruction. The flaming engine hissed and roared beside her. Smoke stung her eyes. Her vision blurred, but she refused to look away. Every nerve, every instinct, every ounce of courage was tested. She leaned forward, adjusting final throttle and rudder, slowly bleeding speed. Finally, slowly, agonizingly, the plane began to slow, tires screeching on wet asphalt, sparks shooting high but maintaining balance. Emergency crews gasped, ready to intervene, but the jet continued forward, controlled, alive, almost obedient under her hands. The passengers barely dared to breathe. 275 lives hung suspended between the groaning metal and the skill of a teenager who had refused to give in to panic. The first officer whispered, trembling with awe, She's done the impossible." Maya's heart raced, chest heaving. She wasn't celebrating yet. Every inch still mattered. She adjusted final trim, nudged the yoke, and kept the plane steady, slowing it incrementally until it rolled almost to a complete stop. And then, at last, silence. A tense, trembling silence broken only by the hiss of brakes, the groan of stressed metal, and the faint roar of the right engine still flaring. Maya exhaled slowly, her hands trembling on the yoke. She looked at the first officer, who could only nod, eyes wide in disbelief. Outside, passengers slowly looked around, some still too terrified to comprehend that they were alive. The plane had touched the ground. The runway lights reflected off wet asphalt, fire crews poised, ready, but unnecessary. 275 lives had survived. But Maya didn't smile, not yet, because even as she guided the plane to a stop, the right engine flared again, smoke curling dangerously. Sparks still danced across the wingtip. The danger wasn't completely over. Somehow, after everything, Flight 712 had not yet exploded. And as the engines hissed and the plane trembled, Maya realized the fight to save everyone was not finished. Not yet. The plane finally slowed to a near halt, but the ordeal was far from over. Sparks still flew from the wing and the right engine hissed, flames licking hungrily at the fuselage. Thick smoke curled into the cabin, stinging eyes and filling lungs with acrid heat. Passengers were frozen in their seats, wide-eyed and shaking, unsure if they were safe yet. Their survival depended not just on the aircraft stopping, but on escaping before the fire claimed it all. Maya's hands hovered over the yoke, trembling slightly. Sweat dripped into her eyes, stinging, but she refused to wipe it. Every second counted. Every micro-movement mattered. She adjusted trim, nudged the nose slightly, and applied the final brakes. The massive jet shuddered as friction burned against the wet runway. She exhaled slowly, trying to calm herself enough to manage what came next: evacuation. "Open slides. Evacuate, everyone, follow instructions," she shouted, her voice cutting through the chaos. Flight attendants, pale and shaking, moved quickly to activate the emergency slides. Passengers, still clutching loved ones, began to inch toward exits, glancing back at the flaming right engine. Some screamed, some whispered prayers, some cried. But Maya remained focused, commanding with quiet authority. "Stay calm, one at a time, move quickly," she instructed. "We don't have long before fire spreads." The first officer, still trembling, monitored the controls. You've landed it, but the fire." "I know," Maya interrupted, eyes flicking to the engine. Flames roared higher, sparks showering the wet tarmac. Move now. Passengers surged toward the slides. Panic threatened to erupt again, but the organized commands from flight attendants and Maya's firm voice kept them moving. One woman dropped her child in terror, but Maya was there in an instant, scooping the child into her arms and guiding them to the nearest slide. Come on, you're safe now, she urged, adrenaline propelling her forward despite the smoke stinging her lungs. Outside, emergency crews watched in disbelief as 275 passengers poured from the plane in a chaotic yet orderly flow. Water cannons stood at the ready, yet no one had needed them, thanks to the calm, decisive actions of a 17-year-old girl whose courage had guided a flaming jet to the tarmac. Maya stayed in the cockpit, monitoring instruments, checking that the fuselage remained intact. Sparks and flames still danced along the right wing, licking the fuselage, threatening disaster if left unchecked. Sweat ran down her face, mingling with soot and tears she didn't allow herself to release. Every second she delayed leaving the cockpit risked her own life, but she couldn't abandon the plane entirely. Passengers clear, she called over the intercom, voice strained but steady. Mostly, the first officer replied, still wide-eyed. Some near the back, moving slowly, scared. Then go help them, Maya said firmly. We've done the hardest part, now get them out before the fire spreads. She rose from the jump seat and stepped over panels, smoke curling around her, heat pressing in. The cabin smelled of charred metal, burning insulation and fear. Passengers froze at the sight of her emerging from the cockpit. An ordinary teenage girl with soot streaked across her face, hair matted, eyes blazing with determination. Follow me, she shouted. I'll get you out safely. People stared in disbelief. Some thought she was a flight attendant. Some thought she was a miracle. She didn't wait for explanations. She guided families, helped the injured, reassured the terrified. Every movement was deliberate, precise, focused on getting them to safety. A man stumbled near the wing exit, coughing from smoke. Maya grabbed his arm, yanking him toward the slide. Come on, don't look back. She turned toward a family of 4 huddled near the rear. Their faces were pale, frozen with terror. Grab my hands, she said, pulling them toward the emergency slide. They hesitated for a heartbeat, long enough for a flash of flame to spike from the engine, but Maya didn't waver. She held their hands and guided them down. Outside, the emergency crews finally moved in, hoses spraying water, sirens blaring, but it was almost anticlimactic. The passengers were already clear, thanks to the extraordinary actions of a teenager who had just performed the impossible. Maya herself descended the last slide, landing on wet tarmac with a thud. Smoke stung her lungs, sweat poured down her body, and her legs shook from exertion. She looked up at the plane. The right engine still flared dangerously, smoke curling upward, but all 275 passengers had made it to safety. Every single life she had fought to preserve was intact. For a heartbeat, she simply stood there, trembling, exhausted, unsure if she could even process what had just happened. Around her, passengers embraced loved ones, crying, screaming, laughing, trembling in a chaotic mixture of relief and disbelief. One little boy ran to her and wrapped his arms around her legs, sobbing. You saved us, he whispered. Maya knelt, hugging him tightly. No, we saved each other, she said softly, her voice barely audible over the chaos. The first officer approached, eyes wide, awe and gratitude etched into his face. I've flown for 30 years, he said hoarsely, and I've never seen anything like that. You landed this plane perfectly. Maya shook her head. Not perfectly, just enough to survive. She glanced back at the flaming engine, sparks shooting into the gray sky, smoke curling ominously. We need to make sure the fire crews contain it. Emergency teams moved quickly, dousing the engine, extinguishing sparks, and preventing the flames from spreading further. Passengers watched, still trembling, some silent, some crying openly. Journalists on the perimeter snapped pictures and recorded video, capturing the aftermath of an event that would shock the world. Maya stepped aside as medics attended to a few passengers with minor injuries, scrapes, smoke inhalation, and shock. She wanted to stay to make sure everyone was safe, but exhaustion threatened to consume her. Her legs trembled, her lungs burned, and her hands shook. She collapsed onto a patch of tarmac, staring at the plane she had just tamed, still smoldering, still alive. For the first time, reality sank in. She had landed a burning jet, stabilized failing engines, and evacuated hundreds of terrified passengers. She had done the impossible, and yet the world had barely begun to understand what had just happened. Around her, passengers were being interviewed, comforted, embraced. Families held each other tightly, some laughing, some crying, some unable to speak. The chaos of the past hour, the fear, the smoke, the fire, the death-defying descent, was slowly giving way to relief and gratitude. Maya's eyes scanned the crowd. She didn't see her father yet, didn't see the emergency crews fully relax. She only saw the lives she had saved, the faces of people who would forever remember that a teenager had guided them through fire and death. And yet, even in that moment of relief, a nagging thought pressed against her consciousness. What would come next? Authorities, investigators, media, all would descend. Questions would be asked. Rules would be examined. Was it legal? Could she be held responsible? Could anyone comprehend the courage, skill, and sheer luck it had taken to survive? She shivered, not from the cold, but from the weight of reality. The plane, still smoking, was a reminder. Survival was never guaranteed. Courage alone didn't ensure safety. And the world outside, though alive, would want answers she wasn't sure she could give. A firefighter approached cautiously, checking the right wing. Sparks sizzled under the wet tarmac as he gestured to others. "It's under control. The passengers are safe," he said, eyes wide as he finally recognized the magnitude of the landing. Maya nodded slowly. Her legs were jelly, her heart still racing, but she felt a quiet satisfaction. She had done it. 275 lives had been saved, thanks to courage, training, and a refusal to succumb to fear. Somewhere in the crowd, a small boy drew a shaky line of smoke and fire on a piece of paper, signing it with "You're my hero." Maya didn't see it yet, but that tiny gesture, a gesture of gratitude and awe, would be the first of thousands in the days to come. But for now, she simply sat on the tarmac, surrounded by chaos, exhausted, alive, and very aware that the world had changed forever. Because a 17-year-old girl had refused to panic when everything around her was on fire. And as she looked back at Flight 712, still smoldering, a thought struck her like lightning. The story wasn't over. Not yet. There were still officials to answer to, questions to face, investigations to endure. Her world had expanded in an instant from teenage normalcy to the center of global attention, and she had no idea if she was ready. The world had already changed before Maya Carter had even left the tarmac. Cameras flashed, microphones thrust forward, helicopters circled above, and journalists scrambled to record every detail. London's Heathrow had never seen anything like this. A teenage girl, barely out of high school, had landed a flaming commercial jet carrying 275 passengers, and she had done it alone. Inside the airport, chaos shifted from emergency response to media spectacle. Reporters shouted questions, crews tried to capture footage, and authorities scrambled to contain the growing hysteria. Passengers huddled in blankets, some still trembling, others speaking in hushed, awed tones. And amidst all of this, Maya was quietly escorted to a secure area, still in her soot-streaked clothes, her legs weak from exertion, her lungs raw from smoke. Her father, watching from Nevada via live feed, could barely breathe. He had spent every day since she could walk teaching her the principles of flight, guiding her through simulations and emergency drills, but he never imagined this would happen. When the news broke, he had dropped everything, heart in his throat, praying that she was alive. Now, seeing her in real time, he could only sit frozen, a mix of pride, fear, and awe paralyzing him. "Miss Carter," a flight operations officer began cautiously, You did the impossible. But we need to talk about protocol, safety regulations, and Maya shook her head, exhausted. I saved them. That's all. They're safe. That's what matters. The officer's expression shifted between admiration and incredulity. Of course. But well, there will be questions, investigations, rules. People will want explanations. Maya nodded slowly, aware of what awaited. She didn't have answers, not fully. Not yet. All she knew was that she had done what she had to do, guided by instinct, training, and the knowledge that hesitation would have cost lives. Meanwhile, outside, news crews were broadcasting live to millions. Social media erupted as videos of the flaming plane, sparks trailing along the wing, and the footage of passengers evacuating reached viewers worldwide. The hashtag Teen Pilot Hero began trending within minutes. People were in awe, disbelief spreading across the globe. Comments ranged from stunned admiration to incredulous skepticism. A 17-year-old landed a jet. Impossible. She's a hero. Pure courage. How could the authorities let a minor do this? Journalists scrambled to interview passengers. One mother holding her child whispered through tears, "We were terrified, but then she took control. I don't know how to explain it. She just saved us." Another passenger, a businessman in a suit, described the moment with shaking hands. "I've flown all my life. Never imagined anyone could do this. And she did. A child, a girl. Incredible." Maya, meanwhile, was ushered into a hospital wing for medical checks. Doctors quickly assessed her for smoke inhalation, exhaustion, minor scrapes, and dehydration. But beyond the physical, the emotional toll was immense. She had faced fire, engine failure, smoke, wind shear, and the terror of hundreds of lives in her hands. It was only now, sitting quietly, that the adrenaline began to drain, leaving a weight of fatigue and the creeping awareness of everything she had endured. Her father arrived within hours, flinging himself into her arms, tears streaking his soot-stained face. "Maya, my God, you did it. You saved everyone," his voice broke. Maya hugged him, exhausted. "I just did what I had to do." But the world outside was not done with her yet. Authorities arrived with questions, cameras capturing every step. Officials wanted details, flight times, instrument readings, checklists. Airline executives, pilots, and aviation regulators demanded explanations, documents, and assurances. Social media speculated on her age, training, and legality. "Were you allowed in the cockpit?" a reporter demanded, voice clipped with urgency. I had simulator training," Maya replied softly, "and I followed what I knew." "Do you realize the legal implications?" another reporter pressed. "Authorities could charge you for unauthorized cockpit operation. Were you breaking the law?" Maya's father stepped forward, voice firm. "She did what any pilot would have done in her place. She saved lives. That's the only thing that matters." Investigators arrived, not just from the airline but from aviation authorities, insurance companies, and government agencies. Questions poured in. How did she manage the descent? What failures occurred in the hydraulic and engine systems? How did she make decisions under extreme stress? They wanted charts, instruments, recordings, anything to reconstruct the miracle landing. Maya answered carefully, replaying every moment in her mind. Flaps weren't fully functional, right engine failed, hydraulic pressure critical. I adjusted trim and rudder continuously, focused on glide path, runway alignment, and speed, kept calm, communicated with first officer, evacuation first priority once landed. Her voice was precise, calm, and almost robotic, because everything else was still too raw. The questions came fast, relentless. Her hands shook slightly, but she refused to let panic rise again. The media frenzy grew. Live coverage, interviews, expert panels dissecting the landing, debates raging over the legality, ethics, and safety protocols. Commentators argued whether a 17-year-old should have even been in the cockpit. Some praised her as a hero of unparalleled bravery. Others questioned the airline's oversight. Through it all, Maya remained quiet, absorbing it with weary patience. She didn't speak of fear, only facts. She didn't speak of panic, only protocol. She didn't boast, because survival had been teamwork, instinct, and the urgency of impossibility. And yet, even as the world marveled, she sensed something stirring beneath the surface. Military agencies, aviation authorities, and even private contractors had begun reviewing her simulator records. Her training, once a secret hobby, a personal challenge, was now under scrutiny. Some were impressed, others curious. Someone somewhere recognized the pattern. A young pilot with extraordinary skill, capable of controlling a plane in the most dire circumstances imaginable. The public, meanwhile, had latched onto her story. Social media campaigns called her a hero. Teenagers across the globe shared images of flight simulators with captions, "Maybe I can do this too." News networks replayed footage endlessly. The flaming plane, passengers sliding down emergency slides, Maya stepping out, soot-streaked and trembling but alive. Authorities eventually allowed Maya a brief moment alone. She sat quietly, staring at the floor, exhausted beyond words. Her body shook from adrenaline and fatigue. She had faced fire, chaos, and death, and had survived to see the result. Every face she had guided off the plane swam in her mind. She whispered a prayer, giving thanks that all were safe. Yet deep down, she knew the world wasn't finished with her. Investigations, media attention, and questions about legality loomed. Airlines would question, experts would analyze, and social media would continue its endless scrutiny. She had saved lives, yes, but the aftermath would be another storm entirely. And in that quiet moment, she realized one thing. Courage had brought her this far, but survival had created a new battlefield, one she wasn't entirely prepared for. Somewhere outside the hospital room, helicopters circled, reporters whispered, and emergency crews debriefed. Every news outlet, every social feed, every aviation channel replayed the footage of Flight 712 over London. A teenager, alone in a cockpit, facing fire and failing engines, had done what no adult pilot could. Maya closed her eyes for a moment, exhausted, aware that the world was watching, waiting, questioning, and that her story was only beginning. The world had already decided on Maya Carter's heroism. News outlets replayed footage of the flaming plane, the sparks dancing along the right wing, and her soot-streaked, exhausted face as she emerged from the cockpit. Social media was a wildfire of admiration, disbelief, and awe. Teen Pilot Hero trended globally and hashtags multiplied. Maya Carter, Flight 712 Hero Teen. Yet, despite the praise, Maya felt uneasy. Recognition was one thing. Scrutiny, investigations, and questions she couldn't yet answer loomed like shadows. Authorities had allowed her a brief rest, but it was anything but peaceful. Airline officials, investigators, and aviation regulators surrounded her, clamoring for every detail. The cockpit procedures, the engine failures, the hydraulic system's collapse. They were fascinated but also wary. A 17-year-old had defied protocols, and the world had watched. The incident was unprecedented, and questions of legality and liability were inevitable. "Miss Carter, we need a full report," a senior aviation investigator said, eyes fixed on her. "We'll need your input on the chain of events, decision-making, and technical details. This is unprecedented." Maya nodded wearily. "I'll do it," she said softly. Her hands trembled slightly. "I just want to make sure everyone's okay." Passengers had been escorted to shelters and medical stations, their stories collected and documented. Families called relatives around the world, breathless with relief. Airlines and authorities coordinated logistics, debriefing survivors, handling insurance claims, and analyzing footage. Yet all eyes remained on Maya, the young pilot who had performed the impossible. Outside, the world was watching. Cameras broadcast live from Heathrow, showing the aftermath of the landing. Firefighters doused the right engine, still smoldering but now contained. Emergency crews marveled at the calm and precision with which passengers had evacuated, guided by a girl who had taken command when every trained pilot had been in peril. Then came the messages that changed everything. emails and calls from military and government agencies. Some requested debriefings, others asked for classified security checks, and a few hinted at something more, a future in aviation, intelligence, or defense. Maya, exhausted and bewildered, barely had time to process the implications. Her father noticed her tension and placed a hand on her shoulder. Maya, you saved hundreds of lives. People will want to thank you, but be careful. Some attention isn't just praise, some is opportunity and some is pressure. Maya nodded, still overwhelmed. She understood instinctively that her life had shifted in a single afternoon from normal teenage routines, school, friends, homework, to something unrecognizable. She was a hero, yes, but also a figure under global scrutiny, a symbol of skill and courage. And she had no roadmap for how to navigate that. News interviews began. Television anchors, journalists, and social media influencers clamored for statements. They asked the questions that everyone was thinking. How did you remain calm? What went through your mind when the plane was on fire? Did you ever think you wouldn't survive? Were you trained to handle this? Maya answered carefully, her voice steady but quiet. She didn't embellish. She didn't seek fame. She explained her simulator experience, the emergency procedures she had learned, and the critical decisions she had made in the cockpit. Her honesty and calm demeanor only amplified the fascination. Millions around the world watched, amazed that a teenager had done what most seasoned pilots never could. Yet with the public admiration came the whispers of concern. Aviation authorities began questioning the airline. How could a minor, even with simulator training, have been in a cockpit during an emergency? Experts debated on television panels. Was this a failure of protocol or a miracle born from instinct and skill? And behind the cameras, in secure offices far from public view, government agencies began evaluating her. Military recruiters, intelligence analysts, and private aviation contractors quietly reviewed her simulator logs, psychological evaluations, and every bit of information they could access. A 17-year-old with nerves of steel, the ability to remain calm under catastrophic stress, and unprecedented skill in a simulator. That was a rare combination. Maya's father noticed the sudden attention and squeezed her hand. They're noticing you, Maya, not just the world, others, bigger entities, be careful. Maya's eyes narrowed. I just want to recover, I just want to be normal again. But normal had already left her. Flight 712 had changed everything. From the first spark of the flaming engine to the final evacuation of 275 passengers, she had become a symbol of courage, skill, and extraordinary potential. And the world, as well as those watching from behind closed doors, would not allow her to return to anonymity. Days passed, but the media frenzy only intensified. Award committees, news channels, and even international governments sought to recognize her heroism. Letters from heads of state, military commendations, and humanitarian organizations arrived, all praising her calm under fire, her ingenuity, and her unparalleled courage. Photographs of Maya at Heathrow, soot-streaked and exhausted, were broadcast repeatedly. Experts dissected every angle of the landing, every decision she made, every moment of the evacuation. Despite the accolades, Maya remained focused on what truly mattered, the lives she had saved. She met survivors, comforted children, and reassured passengers still trembling with shock. She refused to seek attention, only answering questions when absolutely necessary. Then came the first hint of pressure that made her pause. A high-ranking military officer requested a private meeting, citing national security interests and her unique capabilities. They spoke of specialized training, programs designed for individuals with extraordinary aptitude, and opportunities that were both incredible and potentially overwhelming. Her father resisted at first. Maya, they're talking about taking you into something you might not be ready for. You're a kid. Maya's eyes hardened. Dad, I saved 275 lives. I can handle what comes next, but I need to understand it before deciding. The world outside had shifted from admiration to expectation. Millions called her a hero, but behind the scenes, doors opened that could redefine her life entirely. Military programs, elite aviation opportunities, and global recognition awaited, but they came with rules, demands, and responsibilities that no teenager should have to navigate alone. And as Maya sat quietly in her temporary sanctuary, exhausted, soot-streaked, and still reeling from the landing and evacuation, she realized the truth. Her life had changed forever. Flight 712 over London had been only the beginning. The world had seen her courage, skill, and instinct. And now everyone, from media to military officials, was waiting to see what she would do next. Would she retreat into normalcy, return to her teenage life, and try to forget the flames, smoke, and terror? Or would she step into a world she had never imagined, where skill, bravery, and instinct could make her an icon and perhaps a weapon, a savior, or both? The answer wasn't clear yet, but one thing was certain. Flight 712 had proven something remarkable. Maya Carter wasn't just a teenager, she was extraordinary, and the world would not soon forget it. The world had not stopped spinning for Maya Carter. Headlines screamed her name. Teen saves 275 lives in flaming jet over London. Maya Carter, the girl who defied death. 17-year-old pilot becomes global hero. Social media erupted in awe, disbelief, and adoration. Millions of strangers around the globe marveled at the bravery of a teenager who had taken command when adults feared to act. Yet amidst the applause, the cameras, and the endless questions, Maya found herself sitting quietly in a hotel room, staring at the floor, exhausted beyond comprehension. Her father sat beside her, gently holding her hand. "You changed the world today," he whispered, "but you also changed yourself, and that can be heavier than anything else." Maya nodded, her eyes red from smoke, stress, and exhaustion. "I saved them," she said softly. "That's all I wanted, that's all that mattered, the rest I don't know yet." Outside, journalists and camera crews clamored for interviews, vying for a glimpse of the teenage pilot who had done the impossible. Invitations for television appearances, humanitarian awards, and even international ceremonies poured in. But Maya didn't know if she wanted them. The adrenaline had drained, leaving only a hollow exhaustion that no applause could fill. Yet she knew she could not hide. The story of Flight 712 wasn't just hers anymore. It had become a symbol of courage under fire, of calm in chaos, and of extraordinary human instinct. She had become a beacon for hope, a reminder that heroism could come from the most unexpected place, even a 17-year-old girl from Nevada. Her thoughts drifted back to the cockpit, to the roaring engines, the smoke curling through the cabin, the terrified faces of passengers, the shuddering plane on the wet runway. Every detail was etched in her memory. The smell of burning metal, the vibrations of a machine that could kill with one wrong move, the desperate calculations racing through her mind. It all replayed like a film she could never unsee. And yet, amidst the terror, she remembered the faces of the passengers she had guided out of the plane. The children holding parents' hands, the elderly clutching seatbacks, the mothers whispering prayers. Every life she had saved was a testament to courage, focus, and sheer instinct. That thought, she realized, was what would sustain her long after the cameras faded. Authorities had completed their investigations. Flight data recorders, cockpit voice recordings, and technical assessments all confirmed what she had done. A flawless emergency landing under impossible circumstances. Experts agreed that most trained pilots would have failed. And yet there she was, a teenager, operating on instinct, simulator experience, and unshakable courage. Awards and commendations followed. The airline honored her, governments recognized her, and news outlets broadcast her bravery across the globe. But the most profound moment came when she was invited to meet the families of passengers she had saved. She entered a large auditorium at Heathrow, nervous but resolute. Hundreds of faces turned toward her, tearful, grateful, and awestruck. One elderly man stepped forward, shaking. "Miss Carter," he said, voice trembling, "I don't know how to thank you. You saved me, my wife, and my grandchildren. I can't believe a young girl did what so many adults couldn't." Maya swallowed hard, fighting tears. "I didn't do it for recognition," she said softly. "I did it because it had to be done, because they needed someone to act and no one else could at that moment." A chorus of voices joined him, each sharing a fragment of gratitude, each story a testament to lives spared. Maya listened quietly, absorbing every word, every emotion, realizing the true scale of what she had accomplished. This was the human impact, the faces, the emotions, the tears, and the smiles that mattered more than any headline or award. And yet, as she looked out over the crowd, a subtle tension remained. Military officials and government representatives quietly observed from the back, notebooks in hand, calculations running in their minds. Her extraordinary skill had caught their attention, and whispers of potential opportunities, or even recruitment, hung in the air like an unspoken promise. Her father noticed the subtle glances. "Maya," he whispered, "some doors are opening now, and not all of them lead where you think." Maya nodded, understanding without words. Flight 712 had proven her capability, but the world outside was already evaluating what she could do next. Could she handle the expectations, the programs, the scrutiny? Could she survive not just a flaming jet but the glare of the entire planet? That night alone in her hotel room, Maya reflected on everything that had happened. The fire, the smoke, the failing engines, the screaming passengers, it all replayed vividly. And yet beneath the terror and exhaustion, a quiet pride settled in her chest. She had faced death, chaos, and impossibility, and she had prevailed. Her father knocked softly and entered, carrying a cup of water. "You need to rest," he said gently. "Tomorrow the world will still be here, but tonight is yours." Maya accepted the cup, taking a slow sip, feeling the exhaustion deepen. "I'm not sure what tomorrow will bring," she admitted. "The attention, the awards, the questions, it's overwhelming." He smiled, brushing soot from her hair. "You faced fire, literal fire, everything else you can handle. One step at a time, just breathe. You've already done the impossible." Maya closed her eyes, the weight of adrenaline finally giving way to exhaustion. For the first time in hours, or maybe days, she allowed herself to simply be. No calculations, no decisions, no lives in her hands, just herself. A teenager who had stared into the flames of catastrophe and emerged alive, and had saved hundreds in the process. But even as she rested, she knew something had changed irreversibly. Flight 712 had been only the beginning. She had proven to the world, and perhaps to herself, that courage, skill, and determination could defy expectations, challenge fear, and alter the course of destiny. The world might see a hero. She saw someone forever changed, forever aware of the fragility and value of life. And somewhere in the shadows, those watching her, military recruiters, aviation authorities, and government officials, recognized that Flight 712 had revealed more than heroism. It had revealed potential, discipline, and intuition that could not be taught. They would wait, they would watch, and they would seek her out. But for tonight, Maya allowed herself one quiet moment of peace. She opened the window slightly, feeling the cool London air on her face. The city lights reflected faintly in the smoke above Heathrow, sparks still faintly rising from the extinguished engine like embers of a night that would never be forgotten. She breathed deeply, letting the calm wash over her, whispering a promise to herself. "I survived, I saved them, and I will face whatever comes next with the same courage." Outside, the world watched, inspired, awed, and ready to celebrate the teenage girl who had landed a flaming jet, evacuated 275 souls, and defied all expectations. But inside, Maya Carter rested, knowing that true heroism was not in applause or recognition, but in the quiet resolve to act when no one else could. And as the night settled over London, the embers of Flight 712's fire slowly faded. But the legend of the 17-year-old girl who had stared death in the face and emerged victorious was only beginning. If I fail, nobody survives. 21.